All right, thank you for coming today. We're here today to announce the filing of a $10 million class action lawsuit against Scott Morrell and Morrell Catering. It was filed today in the Supreme Court of Nassau County. I have some press kits that I want to hand out, and I want to walk you through the kits to help explain some of these allegations. But the crux of this lawsuit deals with the violation of New York Labor Law Section 196D that deals with an employer's improper withholding of a gratuity. And that's really the basis of this case. Morrell Catering and Scott Morrell, they were in the news last week. Tons of allegations and tons of press with respect to the kosher and non-kosher preparation of food, whether it's in the kitchen or in the trucks. And we are alleging that that same type of deceptive conduct that was alleged there happened with respect to the withholding of gratuities. At a time where people are very critical of corporate greed, this is the ultimate example. The class consists of hard-working men and women who work for an hourly wage. They're the backbone of the operation. They make sure the affair goes smoothly. They serve the food. They deal with the complaints. And they make the reception special. And as a result of that, when patrons come to book events with Scott Morrell and Morrell Catering, they're presented with a contract. And in that contract, there is an 18% gratuity that's clearly set forth. That gratuity is intended by the patron to go to the waitstaff, to the people who work hard on an hourly wage to service that party. But we're here today to tell you that none of that money ever went to the waitstaff. To add insult to injury, in the contract, Scott Morrell sets forth recommended tips for maitre d's, for captains, for butlers, and for valets. With respect to maitre d's, captains, and butlers, these folks never got that gratuity either. This is the ultimate exploitation of workers. Scott Morrell and his catering company prey upon the goodwill and moral conscience of patrons to do the right thing in his effort and campaign to deceive them by pocketing the money. You could see from the turnout today that even though we have 3 class reps, that there are many others who have been affected and who are now angry that their gratuities were wrongfully taken from them. This is a theft. No other words could describe this other than absolute robbery. Okay? And I want to introduce William Cataldo, a class rep, okay, and Roman, another class rep, and they're here to represent all similarly situated folks, whether they were maitre d's, bussers, captains, waiters, who worked for Scott Morrell and Morrell Catering within the last 6 years. When you add up the tips and the gratuities that were wrongfully withheld, we believe it's far in excess of $10 million. Additionally, based upon the filings last week with respect to the kosher and non-kosher related issues, we have sworn testimony from sales managers that's part of the press kit that deals with their presentation and explanation of how they sold these contracts to the public. And they basically state that it was practice for the patron to believe that the tips and the gratuities were going to the waitstaff. And they also talk about the practice of how Morrell would make sure that all of those monies went into his personal pocket and safe. And we just think it's terrible. This case, we intend to go to the fullest extent possible. We want a jury of our peers to decide it, and we're not stopping. Okay? So I'm going to open up I'll open it up to some questions. If anyone wants to ask anything, we're ready to go.
Sir, how did you figure out, or how did the employees not realize that after they've been catering these events, and it was probably well known that the gratuities were written into the cost of these contracts. How come that wasn't showing up on their paychecks?
Excellent question. First, there are two different types of, there are subclasses here. We have the wait staff, the waiters, the bussers, the barbacks, and the bartenders. These are folks who would not have access to the contracts. They were wait staff. However, there were maitre d's and there were captains. And if we look at the contract, the patron is instructed. The patron is instructed to give to the maitre d' a $500 gratuity, to the captain a $200 gratuity, to the valet $275, to the butler $300. So when William Cataldo at the end of the night would receive a $500 cash gratuity, he was under strict orders to accept the gratuity, to lead the patron to believe that he was thankful for the gratuity, and then hand that gratuity to Scott Morrell or drop it in his safe. And the reason why Mr. Cataldo and others similarly situated did not raise red flags is because simply they didn't want to be fired. And that's why you have some folks standing behind me, and you have some folks standing to my right, not wanting to be on camera for fear of retaliation. This is a very, very tough economy. These folks work real hard for their money, and you can't fault anyone for not wanting to risk retaliation and termination of a job when people have bills to pay and sometimes mouths to feed.
We should also add that a lot of the workers are still there. In fact, some people said, I don't want to be on camera because I have to go work tonight. So they're very fearful about losing their jobs.
Have all three of the named plaintiffs already lost their jobs?
I believe that they're no longer working there. But that was prior to the announcement of this suit. Okay?
Can we hear from some of the plaintiffs on their story?
Absolutely. I'm going to introduce William Cataldo, who is a class rep, and he's representing the maitre d's in this case. William?
Should you spell your last name, William?
C-A-T-A-L-D-O.
And where are you from?
Originally Queens. I live upstate right now in Ulster County.
Just a little bit more to the side.
Well, my situation is very simple. I feel the greed has to stop. Over the years, we were forced basically to give in our gratuities at the end of every single party. Myself, along with my captain, who was my partner, for each party, we were instructed every night, every party was right into the safe. I was also instructed that if there were any monies or gratuities given to waitstaff, we were instructed to also take them and also put them right into the safe as well. We did not receive any of the gratuities that were given. We unfortunately were being actually very deceitful to the patrons, the clients, who they thought we were getting them. We were getting all the gratuities and we weren't getting anything. So it was wrong on many different fronts.
And William, in the event that you challenge Mr. Morrell, you
Mhm.
face termination.
Yes, of course.
Did you challenge Mr. Morrell?
I have on many occasions, but I would pretty much want to keep my job, so I would not want to go any further with it.
This was a dictatorship. He
It was.
basically said,
We
it's
had
this
to.
way or no way. By the way, this is Jeff Brown, lead counsel, and I'm Lenard Leeds from the firm of Leeds, Morrell & Brown.
How long has this been going on? Over a period of time, how long?
At least for the last 6 years, and probably much longer. The statute permits us to go back 6 years. Under the New York labor laws, they've been strengthened in the sense that it's the employer really has the burden to show that he made these payments to the employees. We believe that's an impossible burden for him to satisfy because they didn't receive it. So there's no way he's going to be able to produce canceled checks. There's no way he's going to be able to show cash payments.
And these are probably three of the most successful kosher caterer places in Nassau and Suffolk County. It's Woodbury Jewish Center, Temple Beth Torah of Melville, and Temple Israel of Lawrence. So for at least 6 years that we can go back, they have been defrauding not only their staff, but the public. not only with respect to this, but allegedly with respect to holding themselves out as serving kosher food, and it really wasn't. And we understand that there may be lawsuits forthcoming, class actions with respect to that fraud.
And so I understand, were all of these employees working for a central outfit, or were they working
Different
individually at
locations.
the?
They work
But
for
it's
different
all under the
locations.
umbrella of Morrell.
It's all under the
Catering.
same management.
So you would work at one of the three on a regular basis?
For all of them.
All of them. They could rotate,
You
but
could-
primarily they could work. You spend more time at one specific location. But if there was an event, you could
And depending on
switch
where you
up.
lived also made a difference as to
Okay.
where, what facility you work in.
Over the 6 years that you worked there, the amount of tips that you got, I mean, I know this is a $10 million lawsuit, but personally, what do you think you've lost?
Well, I'm gonna say, I would say at least 5 to 7 parties a week at $500 per party.
It's 2,500
Yeah.
times a year is 125. Over 6 years, it's almost $1 million.
I could do anywhere from 3 to 7 parties a week.
How has your life been changed by this? What were you hindered by this financially?
Of course. I mean, I didn't want to obviously say anything. I depended on it. I had a great job. I enjoyed it, and I didn't want to jeopardize that. So I went along with it. I had to. I had no choice.
You didn't have any problems with your finances, like
I
mortgage problems or anything like that, because you couldn't pay the bills or anything, or?
I did.
Oh.
I did. I prefer not to go any further with that, but it did cause problems, personal problems. Yes.
It's not only, are these employees wronged and deceived, but it's also a deception upon the public. The public and a reasonable patron would think twice before agreeing to pay 18% gratuity on top of a $550 cash tip to a maitre d', on top of a $300 tip to a captain, on top of a $300 tip to a valet, on top of a $300 tip to a butler, if he or she really knew the truth, which was it was just going to the owner, which they already paid for in the contract. It's the ultimate deception, and it's the ultimate example of corporate greed. We hope there's no bailout in this case. Any questions, guys? Is that
Yeah.
okay? Thank